My husband told his best friend I wouldn't see a single penny if he filed first. She's a teacher, he laughed, swirling his bourbon. She doesn't even know what a fraudulent conveyance is. He was right. I didn't not then. But I learned. And when he handed me those papers at his firm's anniversary dinner in front of 40 colleagues, I opened my own folder and slid it across the white tablecloth toward him. The sound he made was not something I'll ever forget. But the story didn't start at that dinner. It started the way most quiet disasters do, with small things I convinced myself didn't matter. My husband was the kind of man who made you feel lucky to be chosen. Tall, confident, the sort of person who remembered everyone's name at a party and laughed with his whole chest. When we met, I was 29 and teaching third grade in a suburb outside Columbus. He was a senior financial analyst at a regional investment firm, sharp in a way that felt exciting then and suffocating later. We were married within 2 years. I thought I had found someone who balanced me. What I'd actually found was someone who had decided, quite calmly, that I needed balancing. It started with corrections. Small ones, delivered with a smile. You should have let me handle the contractor, you always get talked into paying more. Or at dinner parties, a gentle hand on my arm mid-sentence. That's not quite how that went, sweetheart. His friends laughed. I laughed. The first 100 times, anyway. By our 4th year, I had stopped offering opinions on anything that touched money. The house, our investments, or his family. That wasn't a conscious decision. It happened the way erosion happens, gradually, invisibly, until one day you notice the whole cliff face has moved. He managed our finances entirely. I had a joint checking account for groceries and household expenses. My salary went in, and a portion came back out for what he called your spending. He never said it cruelly. He said it the way you'd hand a child an allowance, warmly, with the implication that this was a generous arrangement and I should be grateful for it. You've got enough to worry about with your kids, he'd say. I've got this. I let him have it. What I didn't realize, what I couldn't see from inside that life, was that having it meant his name alone on the investment accounts we opened together. It meant the deed to our house transferred into an LLC he controlled. It meant every financial decision we made as a couple existed entirely in a structure that I had no documented stake in. He hadn't done this overnight. He'd done it over years, piece by piece, the same way he'd done everything else, slowly enough that it looked like sense instead of strategy. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday night in March. I had stayed late at school for parent-teacher conferences and came home to find my husband on the back patio, phone to his ear, laughing at something. The sliding door was cracked open. I stepped into the kitchen quietly, not trying to listen, just tired. She's not going to know what hit her, he said. Diane's already signed the paperwork. By the time I file, there won't be anything left in my name. It's all clean. I stood very still. Relax, he continued. She makes $48,000 a year teaching finger painting. What's she going to do, hire a forensic accountant? More laughter. I set my bag down on the counter without making a sound, walked to the bathroom, and sat on the edge of the tub for a long time. I didn't cry. I was too busy trying to understand what I'd just heard. Diane was his sister. The paperwork, everything in her name. By the time he files, he was already planning to leave. And he had been planning it for long enough to have moved assets, drafted documents, and involved his sister in whatever he was building. While I'd been teaching reading groups and grading spelling tests, my husband had been quietly disassembling our marriage from the inside. I went to bed that night before he came in. I lay on my side facing the window and thought about every time he'd handed me a document to sign without explaining what it was. Every time he'd said it's just a formality or don't worry about the details. I thought about the LLC, the accounts, the house. I thought, he thinks I don't understand finance. By morning, I had decided to become someone who did. My best friend from college had spent the last decade as a certified public accountant specializing in divorce litigation. We'd stayed close the way you stay close with someone who has seen you at your worst infrequently, but honestly, I called her that Wednesday and asked if she had time to meet. She heard something in my voice that I hadn't even named yet. When? She said. Whenever you can. Tonight. I met her at a coffee shop 40 minutes from our neighborhood. I told her everything I'd heard. She didn't react with alarm. She reacted with a kind of focused stillness that I would come to recognize as her working face, the look she got when a problem had a solution and she was already finding it. Okay, she said, setting down her cup. Here's what I need you to understand. What you're describing, transferring marital assets into a family member's name before filing, that's called fraudulent conveyance. It's not just unethical. It's illegal. And it's traceable. Every penny has a paper trail. I asked her what that meant for me. It means he's not as clever as he thinks, she said. But you need to move carefully. Don't change anything. Don't confront him. Don't touch the accounts. Just start documenting. She slid a legal pad across the table. Write down everything you remember. Dates, amounts, anything he's mentioned about Diane or the accounts or the house. We're going to build a picture. That night pad became the first of many. I kept them at school, tucked inside a folder labeled Parent Contact Logs in my classroom filing cabinet. I wrote down the phone call I'd overheard. I wrote down the name of every financial institution I could recall being associated with our accounts. I wrote down the date he'd mentioned restructuring things 2 summers ago, which I'd understood then as routine and understood now as something else entirely. I also called an attorney. My best friend referred me to a woman in her professional network who handled high-conflict divorces and had, as my best friend put it, made a career out of men who think they're the smartest person in the room. The attorney met with me the following week. She was calm and direct in a way that made me feel, for the first time in a very long while, like someone was taking me seriously. She explained what a forensic accountant could find. She explained fraudulent conveyance law in Ohio. She explained that if my husband had transferred marital assets to his sister in anticipation of divorce, a court could reverse those transfers entirely regardless of what documents his sister had signed. She used the phrase clawback provision with the comfortable authority of someone who had used it many times before. I wrote it down. The key, she said, is that you file first. And you file with everything already documented. I asked her how long that would take. How long has he been planning this? I thought about the phone call. About the LLC. About don't worry about the details. Longer than I realized, I said. Then we work fast, she said. But not so fast that we miss anything. I went home that evening and made dinner. My husband came in at 7, hung up his coat, and asked how my day was. I told him it was fine. We ate pasta at the kitchen table. He told me about a colleague who'd been passed over for promotion. I listened and nodded and refilled his water glass when it was empty. He didn't notice anything different about me. That was the beginning. Over the next 4 months, I became a student of my own financial life. My best friend pulled public records, property transfers, LLC filings, registered agent documents. Piece by piece, the architecture of what my husband had built emerged. The house had been transferred to the LLC 18 months earlier. 2 investment accounts had been retitled in his sister's name over the course of the past year, a total of just under $400,000. A business equity stake he'd accumulated through his firm had been moved into a trust, with his sister as the sole named beneficiary. He'd been meticulous. He was proud of it. I knew, because I heard him say so. It was a Saturday in late October. He had his best friend over to watch college football. I brought them drinks and chips and excused myself to the bedroom, where I sat at my desk with the door open just enough. They were 2 bourbons in before my husband started talking. I've been ready for 6 months, he said. The second I file, there's nothing left in my name. Clean slate. His best friend asked what I would do. What can she do? My husband said. She's got her classroom and her cat. Let her figure it out. I had my phone propped against a book on my desk, voice recorder running. Ohio is a one-party consent state. My attorney had confirmed this twice. I saved the file, emailed it to a private account my best friend had set up for me, and went back to the kitchen to refill the chip bowl. Need anything else? I called in. We're good, babe, my husband said. I smiled at the wall. Okay. Let me know. By November, we had documented everything. My attorney had filed the paperwork for a fraudulent conveyance claim, prepared and ready to submit the moment I gave the word. The forensic accountant had produced a 40-page report tracing every transfer, every retitling, every document that moved our shared assets out of my reach. It was, my attorney said, one of the cleaner cases she'd seen, not because my husband had done anything small but because he'd been so confident he hadn't bothered to be subtle. People who think they're untouchable don't cover their tracks, she said. They leave highways. I asked her what I should do in the meantime. Keep being exactly who he thinks you are, she said. Right up until you're not. So I did. I attended his firm's holiday party in November and smiled at his colleagues and asked thoughtful questions about their portfolios. I cooked his favorite meals on weekends. I laughed at his impressions of his more pompous clients. When he made offhand comments about money, good thing, one of us understands this stuff or you'd be lost without me handling it, I nodded in the agreeable way I had perfected over years of practice. He relaxed completely. He stopped being careful. His phone sat unlocked on the counter. He took calls in the next room without closing the door. The confidence of a man who believes he is absolutely, categorically in control is a particular kind of blindness. His firm's 10-year anniversary dinner was scheduled for the first Friday of December. A catered event at a downtown hotel ballroom, formal, significant, the kind of evening my husband had talked about for months. He'd been on the planning committee. He was proud of it. 2 days before the dinner, he told me he needed to stop by Diane's on his way home from work. Paperwork stuff, he said. Of course, I said. I called my attorney from my car in the school parking lot. He's filing this week, I said. I know, she said. I filed this morning. We're already in. The day of the dinner, I wore a deep green dress I'd bought 2 months earlier and kept in my classroom closet. My sister came over to help with my hair. She knew some of what was happening, enough to squeeze my hand hard when she left and say, "You call me the second it's done." My husband looked at me when I came downstairs and said I looked beautiful. He said it the way he always did, with ownership, not warmth. Like I was something he'd acquired. Thank you, I said. The ballroom was warm and golden, string lights strung above tables draped in ivory linen. His colleagues and their spouses moved through the space with the easy confidence of people who inhabited this world naturally. I moved through it too, and no one there would have guessed that my heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. Dinner was served. Toasts were made. His firm's managing director gave a speech about integrity and growth that made several people at our table nod seriously. My husband nodded too. We were somewhere between the salad course and the entree when his best friend leaned over and murmured something in his ear. My husband straightened slightly. He reached into the inside pocket of his blazer. He stood up and tapped his water glass. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, with the smooth ease of a man who was never sorry for anything. "I just need a quick moment with my wife." The table went quiet with the polite curiosity of people who expected a toast, or maybe a gift, an anniversary gesture from a husband to his wife at a beautiful dinner. He looked at me with a smile I recognized, the one that meant he believed he had already won. He laid the envelope on the table in front of me. "Merry early Christmas," he said. Someone at the table laughed nervously. I looked at the envelope. Plain, unsealed. My name written in his handwriting across the front. I picked it up without rushing, without changing my expression, and opened it the way you'd open any piece of mail, carefully, without performance. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Filed that afternoon. His attorney's name printed across the top, his signature at the bottom, neat and satisfied. He was watching my face. His best friend was watching my face. 2 or 3 of his colleagues, sensing something, were watching my face. I read it fully, folded it once along its original crease, set it down. "Thank you," I said. His smile flickered. I reached into my bag, a simple black clutch I'd carried tonight for exactly this reason, and removed a pen. I uncapped it, signed my name on the last page, capped it, and placed the papers back in the envelope. "Done," I said pleasantly. He blinked. Around us, the table had gone genuinely still. "That's it?" he said. He'd meant it to sound casual. It didn't. "That's it," I said. I folded my hands on the table. "Although there is one more thing." I reached back into my bag and withdrew a manila folder. It wasn't dramatic or gold-wrapped. It was ordinary and neat, and I set it on the table between us the way you'd set down a completed assignment. "This is a copy of the filing my attorney submitted this morning," I said. "Fraudulent conveyance claim, traced asset recovery, and a request for full financial disclosure. The original is already with the court." He stared at the folder. "There's also a forensic accounting report," I continued, my voice even, "documenting the transfers to your sister over the past 14 months. The house LLC, the investment accounts, the trust, all of it, dated and sourced." His best friend had stopped smiling. "That's not," my husband started. "And," I said, "because I want to be thorough. There are transcripts of 2 recorded conversations included in the supporting documentation. Ohio is a one-party consent state." I paused. I looked it up. The table was absolutely silent. My husband's face had done something I had never seen it do in 11 years. It had gone blank, not the controlled blankness of a man composing himself, but the blank of a man whose processing had simply stopped. His managing director, sitting 3 seats away, was looking at him with an expression that had nothing to do with the anniversary dinner anymore. "While you recorded?" His best friend stood up slightly, then sat back down. "The clawback provisions are pretty clear," I said, still pleasantly. "My attorney explains it well in the summary on page 2. My husband picked up the folder. His hands were steady but his jaw wasn't. He opened it. He read the first page. I watched his eyes move across the lines, and I watched the color change in his face, a slow draining, like water leaving a tub. He reached the section on the sister. He turned the page. He reached the transcripts. He put the folder down. He looked at me with something that wasn't anger, it was closer to vertigo. The look of a man who had mapped every inch of a room and walked into a wall that wasn't supposed to be there. "You planned this," he said. Very quietly. "No," I said. "You planned." "I prepared." His managing director excused himself from the table. 2 colleagues followed. His best friend was studying his bread plate with great intensity. My husband sat there with the folder in front of him and didn't say anything else for a long moment. "Entrees?" A server appeared at my elbow, perfectly timed, holding 2 plates. "Yes, please," I said and smiled at her. She set my plate down. The salmon was beautifully cooked, resting on a bed of lemon risotto. I picked up my fork. My hand was completely steady. I realized, genuinely hungry. He didn't touch his food. We didn't speak again that evening. I finished dinner. I said a warm goodbye to 2 of his colleagues' wives, women I had always liked and would miss. I collected my coat from the check room. I called my sister from the lobby of the hotel. "Done," I said. She made a sound on the other end of the line that was half laugh, half exhale, like she'd been holding her breath for months. She probably had. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected, not peaceful exactly, but purposeful. My husband moved into a hotel within 3 days. He didn't fight me on it. I think, in those first days, he was still trying to understand how far back I had started. He'd been so certain. He'd built his certainty carefully, over years, out of my silence and my compliance, and every time I'd nodded and said "you handle it" and walked away. He'd mistaken my quiet for ignorance. He'd never considered that I might have simply been listening. The court process moved steadily. The fraudulent conveyance claim held. The sister, faced with a forensic report documenting each transfer, retained her own attorney and ultimately had to cooperate with the disclosure requirements because the alternative, my attorney explained to me over coffee one afternoon, was substantially worse for her. The assets began to surface. Not all at once. Not without friction. But they surfaced. My attorney had a way of delivering updates with the calm satisfaction of someone watching pieces land exactly where she'd calculated they would. She'd been doing this for 20 years. She'd seen versions of my husband many times before, and not once, she told me, had she seen the paperwork outsmart the man. "They always leave a trail," she said. "They can't help it. Being that sure of yourself is its own kind of carelessness." His best friend stopped answering his calls. I learned this secondhand, through my sister, who heard it from someone adjacent to their social circle. The recorded conversations had made it into the legal record. The detail about letting her figure it out appeared in a deposition. I don't know exactly what was said when that surfaced at his firm, but I know his managing director requested a meeting with him in the 3rd week of December. And I know that by the new year, his name had been removed from 2 of the projects he'd been running. Some things you don't orchestrate. They just follow. I spent December differently than I'd spent any December in 11 years. My best friend came over on a Saturday and we rearranged the furniture in the living room, moved the couch to a different wall, turned the reading chair to face the window the way I'd always wanted. She brought Thai food and we ate on the floor surrounded by furniture at odd angles, and it felt more like a home than it had in years. I bought new throw pillows. Terracotta and cream. He had always preferred gray. My sister spent Christmas Eve with me. We cooked too much food on purpose: a small ham, green beans with almonds, sweet potato biscuits from a recipe our grandmother had written on an index card, and ate at the kitchen table with candles lit and old music playing. She gave me a set of watercolor paints and a blank sketchbook. "You used to paint in college," she said. Before. I had forgotten that. I held the sketchbook for a moment and tried to remember the last time I'd made something just because I wanted to. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it the whole way down. On Christmas morning, I sat by the window in the sunroom with coffee and that sketchbook open in my lap. The neighborhood was still, snow thin on the ground, the light pale and gentle through the glass. I thought about the woman who had stood in a hotel ballroom 2 weeks earlier with a manila folder in her bag and a pulse hammering in her throat, and I thought about the woman who had sat on the edge of a bathtub in March, too stunned to cry, listening to her husband laugh at her from a patio. They were both me. I knew that. But only one of them was here now, in this quiet room, with coffee that was exactly the right temperature and music playing from a speaker that no one else would get to change. I pressed the pen to the first page of the sketchbook and started drawing. Nothing specific. Just lines, and then shapes, and then something that started to look like the view from my window, the roofline across the street, the bare branches, the particular gray-white of a December sky. I wasn't good at it. My proportions were off and the shadows were wrong in at least 3 places. I kept going anyway. January brought the divorce settlement conference. My attorney and I sat across from my husband and his attorney in a beige conference room on the 14th floor of a downtown office building. My husband wore the same expression he wore in difficult meetings, controlled, remote, slightly above it all. It lasted about 20 minutes before his attorney leaned over and said something quiet in his ear. He signed. Not everything I'd asked for. That's not how these things work, my attorney had told me from the beginning. But the house. A fair share of the recovered assets. Financial support structured in a way that reflected the actual length of our marriage and the actual contributions I'd made to it, including the decade during which my salary had funded household expenses while his accumulated, untouched in accounts I couldn't access. When it was done, I walked out of the building into the January cold and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just breathing. My best friend was waiting at the corner with 2 cups of coffee. She handed me one without saying anything. We walked half a block before either of us spoke. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it. "Hungry," I said. "Is that a normal thing to feel?" She laughed. "It's a very normal thing to feel." We went to lunch. We stayed for 3 hours and talked about everything except the divorce, her work, a trip she was planning, a book we'd both read last summer and had different opinions about. At some point, without quite noticing the transition, I realized I wasn't thinking about any of it anymore. Not the conference room, not the documents, not the face he'd made when I'd opened that folder in the ballroom. I was just at lunch with my best friend on a Tuesday in January. That was enough. I understood sitting there, actually quite a lot. Spring came gradually, the way it does in Ohio, tentatively, with setbacks, a warm week followed by a cold snap that makes you wonder if you imagined the whole thing. I started running again in March, slow circuits around the neighborhood in the early morning when the light was still thin and the streets were mostly empty. I was bad at it at first. My shins ached. I stopped at every hill. I didn't care. My classroom felt different that spring. Not changed, the same 23 8-year-olds. The same reading groups and spelling lists and afternoon projects that ended up somehow involving glitter no matter how carefully I planned. But I was different in it. More present. Less performing. One of my students, a quiet kid who read above grade level and rarely looked up from whatever book he'd smuggled into class, caught me smiling at nothing one afternoon and said, "You seem happy today, Mrs." And then stopped, because he'd remembered that I'd told them in February that my last name was changing. "Miss," I corrected gently. He nodded seriously. "You seem happy today, miss." "I am," I said. "Thanks for noticing." He went back to his book. I went back to the whiteboard. Outside the window, the maples along the sidewalk had started to come back in. That particular bright green that only exists for about 2 weeks in April before it deepens into summer. I stood there for a moment and just looked at it. Later that afternoon, after the last bus had pulled away, I sat at my desk and opened the sketchbook my sister had given me at Christmas. Most of the pages were full now, window views, coffee cups, the shape of my backyard in different lights, bad portraits of my cat. One genuinely terrible attempt at drawing my own hand that I kept anyway because it made me laugh. I turned to a new page. I thought about a man who had spent years calculating exactly how small he could make me without leaving marks. Who had moved money and signed documents and laughed with his best friend about how little I understood about how predictable, how limited, how manageable I was. who had walked into a ballroom with an envelope in his pocket and the absolute certainty that I would fall apart in front of his colleagues, and who had discovered, quietly and publicly, that the woman he'd been underestimating had been paying attention the whole time. I thought about what my attorney had said the first time we met. People who think they're untouchable don't cover their tracks. They leave highways. I thought about the sketchbook, the terracotta pillows, the rearranged furniture, the morning runs, the lunch that lasted 3 hours, the April maples. I picked up the pen and wrote one line across the top of the blank page, not a title, just a reminder, something to come back to when I needed it. He thought the silence meant I wasn't listening. I closed the sketchbook. Outside, a breeze moved through the maple trees, and the light shifted, and I gathered my things and locked the classroom and walked out into it. If this story stayed with you the long game, the quiet preparation, the moment the folder hit the table, hit like and let me know your favorite part in the comments. For more stories of women who chose patience over panic and came out on the other side, subscribe and tap the bell. I'll see you in the next one.